I never had students in New York from like one semester to the next because the universities were so big, but here it happens pretty frequently.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like in the spring class, I've got like half the classes returning students. Yeah. It's like, yes, we just get to like keep going on, and there's no like there's no awkward trying to figure everybody out.
Yeah, usually
Computer.
And we will probably wait just a few minutes because everyone who did RSVP said they were going to be here at this time. So we'll give them all a couple of more minutes.
Okay.
And then we'll jump in.
my wife wanted to be here, but she couldn't, so I'll just relay the information and hope they're good enough. I don't know.
Well, she can always follow up with us as well.
Yeah. I think between the two of us, we're hoping to have, she has 2 junior classes she's wanting to be with, and I have 2. So I guess between the two of us, like 75, 80 kids.
Wow, that's good.
Awesome.
It's like 1,000,000 degrees in here, huh?
Huh?
It's like 1,000,000 degrees.
I know. I think it's comfortable.
Oh, it's because I'm wearing a sweater. I'm taking my sweater.
Have you been in my office? My office is a
Your
sauna.
office.
It's terrible. So this feels normal.
Mine usually fluctuates. Oh, Veronica, no, I didn't mean to open it. Thank you, though. No, everyone's gonna choose.
Wow, you even have a balcony?
Yeah, she has a picnic table.
I have a picnic table and everything.
She managed to bribe facilities one day with lemonade if they would like clean it out for her, and they like.
And they've been doing it.
I know you're. You're
yesterday before all this
too
wind,
personable.
Was it a mess out
oh,
there?
it was horrible. There were like crazy weeds and like debris and
No,
pieces
no,
of
it
the
looks
building.
like, was the picnic table already there?
yes.
Hey.
I
She's got the setup over here.
All right.
We even held our first writing center meeting of the semester over here. Because it's just awesome. Oh, I see. I closed it. I forgot. I can't. Bad at science.
Oh, you have to let it aerate.
Yeah. Well, and that one's like really picky. Unless it's all the way full, it doesn't actually come out.
Yeah. So this is not the best then. I have to get another one.
No, I'm sorry. You tried.
I did. It was cheap. And it looks pretty, so
That's true.
yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We're gonna wait maybe just like another minute or so and see. At least 2 other people said they were gonna be joining us.
All right, I'm gonna go and grab my computer.
Okay.
You know what? I'm gonna do the, I realized I have my backpack with my laptop is in the back of my car, right up front. Just in case.
Did you see the background sign I put on? the
I
lens?
saw it.
That was just because it looked like a
Why
storage
can't
closet.
it be a gender neutral restaurant?
Because it has more than one stall. The state of Santa Fe, the state of, well, I guess it's a state thing too.
If they have more than one stall, they
can't.
have to be gender separate?
Mhm.
In Vermont, they don't.
In New York, they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
but here, if it's a single stall, then it's gender neutral. Which,
So somebody was trying to explain to me that that Katie does a separate like program or like works with separate students. Is that right?
As far as
I don't
I don't
know.
understand.
I don't know. I didn't like that there was like a. I don't know. Somebody was trying to explain. They were like, oh yeah, but like West has like this like satellite thing or no? They didn't know what they were talking about.
No, I don't think so.
And that's why I was like,
Unless she's bringing in extra cash that I don't know about. I don't know. You just.
She's moonlighting.
Yeah.
High
I
school
don't know.
classes.
No, I think
It's not a bad smell, right, Lynn?
To be perfectly honest, can't smell anything over the coffee. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, well, that's good then.
I don't know. Let's try to stand over here. That way, yeah, at least I can't sort of. And we'll just wait for Lauren to get back and then we'll jump in. If anybody else comes in, great. No worries.
I can,
Should I sign in? I am using your space.
I don't really think it matters. I'm gonna come over here and hang out. Sorry, I don't have any cream for the coffee.
At this point in the day. However I can do it.
Okay, well, we'll jump in, and if some other folks join us in person or online, fantastic. If not, then maybe they'll just show up at 6, and that's what we'll do. I was going to introduce myself, but I think you all know me. I don't know. Peter, if you can see, we have AJ Lopez from West Las Vegas, who's also representing his partner, right? Because you're both going to be teaching True Grit. The purpose of today is not to be like this is how to teach the book, but to kind of like start a conversation about how we might use it. I'll talk about some things. Oh, there's something I forgot to bring up. I'll bring it later. How I'm thinking about using it, and kind of start gathering resources for how it might be done, as well as maybe just thinking a little bit outside of what we might expect. I think I'm still trying to convince Lauren to teach it in her career-led class, and I know it's a stretch, but I'm gonna keep pushing.
Big stretch.
I'm gonna keep pushing for it anyway.
Well, it might, at this point, it's a stretch for the class to make.
Oh,
Has a
no.
sad one student enrolled.
Oh, I was thinking about auditing it, doing the thing. If that
I think
helps.
that, well, here's part of the problem is that it's showing up in degree audit as not meeting the core literature requirement, which it does.
Yeah.
So what?
We should just send out a mass email to all of our majors.
Mm-hmm.
So just like a real quick, so Lauren and I, as well as April Kent and Josephine DeSena from Donnelly Library, wrote this grant this year. Well, I was trying to remember, did we write it? Was it actually technically last year that we wrote it? It was like last fall, wasn't it?
We wrote it last fall, a year ago, and we
So-
were awarded in the spring.
Yes, and we were awarded in the spring, essentially to bring discussions of a literary text into the Las Vegas community, and with that, hosting a bunch of events and different kinds of outreach. And we got it. We got it for True Grit. We chose True Grit for a couple of reasons. One, that Las Vegas is mentioned like on one line, and the line where Las Vegas is mentioned in the novel. But we also thought it would be, I mean, it would kind of tie in with all of our Old West sensibilities. I thought it'd be interesting to, like that other line is the first line in the book, and reading something by a young female protagonist might be interesting, especially because it sort of bucks what a lot of people think of when we think of Westerns. And then the movie, it sort of like downplays the fact that she's the central character also. So I think we've settled on that. If you're interested in some of the other offerings, and Peter, I can bring some over if you like. We received these
We
awesome.
have giant horse stickers.
Yeah, these bookmarks.
Over there.
These bookmarks, which list every book that we could have chosen from, that the library sent over as well. And there were some good things. We were originally going to go with Bless Me Ultima, but they rotated it off the list this year. So maybe in the future or another time, we'll bring it back. But so one of the reasons that we wanted to bring it not just as a community thing, but a classroom thing, is we thought it would relate to a lot of the things that we can discuss here and the connections to Las Vegas. Also we thought that this would be something that a novel the community would enjoy reading. Like, so it's fairly all ages. I think you could probably even do this at the middle school level, and it would not be it would be pretty well received. But as well, like lots of different age groups can come together. One of the reasons why I was really excited about writing this grant to begin with was also to have to have a common text or texts that could be shared among different classrooms across the university, across the town, that everybody is sort of engaging in, and maybe getting those students involved in activities around it. They're reading a novel in their class, they're doing something when they're on campus because there are these events going on, but then also hopefully becomes a curriculum that that we as educators can sort of capitalize on in the future, because I think we write this curriculum for the spring, and then you know, in a couple of years we get a bunch of your students who have already read it, or students who have taken my class and have read it are then discussing it in another class, or discussing it in a different way in Peter's class, and really just becomes a way of like continually looking at the same text from lots of different angles. It's something I get really excited about that. It's always seems like a bummer when you just, I don't know, I like, one of the other things I miss about having like a longer time period is you discuss a book and then it feels like it's gone and it's over, and you don't get to do that with students anymore. I really like this idea that maybe we'll have students who'll be familiar with this book for a couple of years that we can kind of keep coming back to. So we also chose it because it has 2 films, one of which was filmed nearby. I can show the trailer, but I don't have to if everyone's familiar with the 1969 John Wayne trailer. Has everyone seen this? You have? Okay, then we're watching it just for you.
It's a true 60s Western vibe, so I like it.
I've never actually seen this whole thing.
Really? Now that you've seen the whole movie.
Ben, do you know where the whole film, not just the trailer, but it was made?
In Colorado. Most of it was in Colorado. Yeah. Yeah. It seems like even though the book takes place mostly in Arkansas, I don't think it's ever been.
Yeah, well, I
it's
saw
ever
the
been-
Aspens.
Yeah.
in the one scene, and so, okay.
I'm like,
But-
those are not Arkansas mountains.
No. So I don't. Yeah, it's. You've never seen it either, just not the trailer.
I've never seen the movie.
It's
I've never seen the movie.
It's a 1960s Western. Yeah. And there's, I think, I mean, I don't know, for me too, like as someone who does a lot of pop culture stuff, and I do a lot of film in my classes, like there's a lot just in the trailer to unpack in the way, a lot about what it says about the people who would have liked watching this movie. And John Wayne was already super popular when he made this movie. Kim Darby was, I don't know, sort of popular at this point, right, Veronica? Not yet. This was one of her first big ones.
This is one of her first big ones. Yeah.
But yeah, there's you see, I think you see a lot. The trailer really plays up the gender aspect of it, that this young girl is going on this like adventure, and really kind of like digs into that and makes that the forefront. But again, even there, John Wayne sort of steals the spotlight and becomes like the main protagonist of the story. And we're there to watch him, like be a man, do manly
Well,
things.
and she's kind of dykey, so that, I mean, seriously, though, that makes her a good foil for him, Whereas
She
in
never
the
marries, I'm just saying.
in the more contemporary version, she's got pigtails.
Right, yeah.
And she's very much a little girl.
Yeah, and so so that is, I have that one queued up
Yeah.
as well, and they make a really fascinating comparison too. So a lot darker, definitely a lot more like looking at that sort of like gritty Western that I don't really think of John Wayne as doing gritty Westerns, even though they existed back then. I think more of like the spaghetti Westerns as being the darker ones back then. But have you all seen this one? No? It's pretty
I
good.
was just looking at when I can't remember, I know I've seen it. I don't remember with whom or where I lived at that point. I looked it up and it was December of 2010.
Mhm.
So it must have been in Missouri, but yeah.
It's pretty good. I mean, it's a Coen Brothers movie. Like it's pretty
I've
good.
been wanting to watch it since it came out.
Yeah, it's
Haven't had the chance.
It's actually, I think it's one of the better Coen films.
Yeah, I think it's up there. I don't know. I think it's up there with like No Country, but I put that one as sort of like one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a lot darker. One of the things I think is interesting is it pulls a lot of the dialogue directly from the novel, whereas the John Wayne one, I think there's maybe more ad lib, or maybe they just like sort of like touched up the language a little bit. But it definitely is a darker take on it. I think it's in some ways, maybe not that it matters, but it is maybe truer to the plot of the original novel than the John Wayne. I think in the John Wayne one, Blaine Campbell and Kim Darby end up together.
I don't remember that, but I know that they definitely took liberties to make John Wayne the more front part of it, like it was his big heroicness.
Right.
No, in the original movie, the Glenn Campbell character dies.
Oh, yes.
He's-
I'm thinking of a
He
different
gets
film.
his skull fractured, lives just long enough to make that final shot, and then he dies.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Peter. Yes, yeah, I must be thinking of a different John Wayne Western. But yeah, you're absolutely right, because that does. Actually, I don't remember if he dies in the novel or not. I read the book a long time ago. I've been slowly rereading it.
It was like 7th grade for me.
It
really has been that long.
It's been. I think I read it maybe the year before the second film came out. And so it's been about 10 years. But yeah, I don't remember what happens to LaBeef, the Texas Ranger, at the end of it. But he is certainly a really interesting character. That whole stealing a kiss line is straight from the book. It's a little bit disconcerting because again, she's 14. Yeah, it's a little bit weird. So lots to play with there. I'm excited about just watching films with my students and reading the book alongside it, but I've got lots of other stuff for that as well. So a quick idea of what some of the program we have. Some of it's still in flux. This is general kind of what we're looking at. We're obviously having this programming way later than we planned. We had hoped to have it I think originally we said September, and then quickly realized that was crazy, and then we said October, and then the cyber attack happened. So here we are on November 20th. But I think we're gonna still try to do something in early spring as well, and try to just touch base again. I'm not sure where we are with the second item on there, with the high school art classes doing something. We didn't talk about it at the last meeting. I assume it's still happening, that there's going to be an art show in the Rager Gallery at Donnelly Library of local high school art. And then February 7th, I think, is definitely going to be our kickoff. I think that one we're not moving at all, right, Lauren?
We're not moving it.
And it's going to be a kickoff event in the sub, and there'll be a big to-do about it. And then we'll immediately going to be following it up with a screening of the John Wayne film. And that'll be a fun night. On the 4th, we're going to screen the Coen Brothers one, so they'll be about a month apart, depending on how that works. And then March 7th is going to be the Cowboy Tea, which is going to be their sort of their Western themed version of the Harry Potter tea that they've been doing. It's always been really, really popular. It's primarily a kids event, but it'll be just a good tie-in with everything else. There'll be lots of crafts. So I think they're going to make. Are they still talking about making horses?
They have them. It's not so much making them and Peter knows this as well. For the homecoming race every year, they do the kids.
I remember her saying
the kids K. And so there is an excess of inflatable plastic ponies floating around the university. So I think the goal is to maybe use up some of those.
That sounds fantastic. That's amazing. That's some of it. The rest is that there will be 5 book discussions with different sort of target audiences. I'll be inviting my students to several of these. We're going to do, this is not the updated version. Still having trouble with OneDrive. No, because I definitely updated this before I sent it. So the first 2 are going to be, there's going to be 2 readings at Carnegie Library the week of the 24th is kind of where we position them. Probably not on the same day. And we're hoping to do something, a reading, a discussion at West Las Vegas for students. And we'll talk with you and Katie about figuring out when that would be a good time to do that. And then doing something led by a scholar from Highlands at Donnelly Library on the 24th that would be open to the public, and then doing a sort of a faculty talk on the 7th, which I believe would also be open to the public. The plan is it's just going to be faculty, sort of a panel of faculty will be leading that discussion. And so there's a couple of other things that are still, I think, in the works. Geek Week for the English department is the first week of April, and we're definitely going to be doing something with that, because I know a bunch of us are teaching True Grit in the spring. There's an extra S in there too. But yeah, we'll definitely be doing something that week as well, and putting those together. Yeah, I was thinking about that today. I got something
No, it's the same way for me. My files are everywhere and I can't keep track of which version.
Well, the other day I was putting things and grades into the Excel document, and then I closed it at work, and I went home, and none of them were there. I had to re-enter them. So yeah, this whole thing is just,
Things aren't synced up.
no.
And I would be happy as well for the West event, AJ, if students wanted like a creative writing workshop, like
That'd be
I
awesome.
could give them a prompt and we could like write a Western on the spot or something
That'd
like
be really
that.
awesome, because that's something that for me, I can do literary analysis, research, all that stuff. But my juniors actually right now are working on a personal narrative essay because we're reading Jimmy Santiago Baca's memoir, right? And so today I'm sort of like, okay, here's your prompt, and they're like, where do we go from here? I'm like, oh, you gotta be creative. You gotta hook your audience. You need to use Jimmy's book maybe as to inspire you and stuff. So that'd be really awesome, because I'm not a creative writer.
Like I'm happy to do something about like scene writing
That'd be
or
awesome.
you know,
That'd be really cool.
so that could be a cool thing if you've got the
I know,
students
that's really
doing
cool.
some creative work.
Yeah.
I'm happy to come in and give them prompts and you know,
Yeah.
I can go for any length of time you want.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. I think
Got stamina.
in our curriculum, I think that's our biggest hole right now, is because none of us are really creative writers.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk, and we also are gonna hopefully add someone from West on our council to plan the rest of this stuff. So we're looking for volunteers.
I'm really cool.
But yeah, we'll definitely be reaching out, and we'll figure out what those dates are going to be as well, and what's a good time to do that. And again, this is something that we can come back to as well and finalize, you know, before the beginning of the semester. It doesn't have to all be decided right now. But there's something else I was going to say about over here, and I don't remember what it was. We've talked about doing another screening of the 1969 True Grit after the 7th, but I don't know if we haven't picked a date for that, right? We talked about doing a second one as well, and those will be, I think, like at the first one on the 7th, where is it? Will be at the sub ballroom, but the others will all be at the Ilfeld, so they'll be free and anybody can go. I'll be offering my students extra credit to go to those. Actually, I'm probably gonna require them to go to one of them, but yeah, they can pick. But we'll be showing those, and then I believe, which may only matter for a few people, but the library I think already has these films, and they're going to be putting them on reserve as well, so that if any faculty, I'm saying it out loud now, so I remember to say it later, can check those out as well. So a couple of things for if you're not super familiar with the book. Did you get to read? Have you got to read the book, AJ?
I got to page 40.
Nice. That's actually about where I am. Yeah. So some of the themes that I think are really, really interesting are, there's a lot of like dichotomies in there. There's the difference between revenge and justice, where the character Maddie is like, you know, going under the guise of justice, but really just wants revenge for this person murdering her father. There's these ideas of cowardice. What is cowardice? What is courage? And then like sort of central to that also is that idea in the novel of like, what is true grit? Like it's never explicitly explained. She just says, like she says in the trailer, that she's looking for someone of true grit, and it's not ever really explained what that means. So it's sort of in the subtext. Morality is a big one as well, especially as it relates to justice too. As I was rereading it, I was getting kind of excited because there's early on, one of the early scenes is a courtroom scene, and you see it in the Jeff Bridges trailer, where Rooster Cogburn is like sort of witness to having brought this person to justice, but after having murdered that person, basically that person's entire family, like in self-defense. And so there's really, really, and it reads like the way that it's written in that section is not like dialogue. It reads like stage play, and so it's just you know, Mr. Barlow, Judge Parker, Rooster Cogburn. It just kind of reads as like a law transcript of who said what, or like, what do they call it? Now I'm losing, like a stenographer's transcript. And so it just reads like that. And I don't know, there's a lot in there that you know, makes me think of a lot of the current conversations that are happening around the country about, you know, police brutality and things like that. And when you kind of get to see him, one of the dark sides of Rooster Cogburn is that he is he's not really interested in like due process, and he even has like early on has like a whole rant. He's kind of drunk, but has a whole rant about how laws get passed down by these judges who live like far away and like they don't understand the realities of the West. And so there's this really, really interesting kind of exploration there. Masculinity and femininity is a really, really big one, especially just because to compare Maddie to Rooster, but even then Maddie sort of like eschews like the stereotypes of her gender of the time. She's really, really upset with like the woman who runs the boarding house. She's really upset about a lot of things. As I was reading, I was thinking about you, Peter, the other day, because she goes on several political tirades, and I was like, it was things I definitely don't know enough about that I feel like I need to go research and be like, who are these like governors and things like? And I know that they're real people, or I think that they're real people. But she goes on several of them, and she talks a lot about like about her father and like what his political leanings were, and it really situates her within the time really interestingly with a little bit of research. And the Civil War obviously plays a big part in that. And then a big part is prejudice, where Maddie is sort of, by our standards, we would probably still call her racist, but for a time she's maybe a little bit progressive, but she's certainly very classist, and she looks down on people who are like, I think she calls like one person, like she calls more than one person just like trash, just like outright calls them trash, and it really looks lowly on people who are not wealthy or who don't seem to like have some kind of like class to them, to their personality. And so I think there's a lot to explore there, both in the novel and in the films. A lot of these things play out pretty well in one or the other films. And then, the bulk of what I wanted to discuss today is kind of like the resources. Peter, I can send you these as well.
Okay.
But these are, here, I'll just bring you guys. These are sample lesson plans from the NEA, and I'm gonna swap views here. Okay, wait, I have to do that, and then this, that. Is that right?
Whatever's outlined in green is what you're sharing.
You just hit the green tabby at the top.
This one.
Yeah. No. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, good. So these are from the website. The website itself is a pretty good resource. There's like a general overview of the book and like a pretty detailed author bio. I think it's even more detailed than the Wikipedia version. They offer a bunch of discussion questions. There's some multimedia things, a couple of audio discussions, and then there's a video about why they chose to add True Grit to the list of their selections as well. And then they've got some community things, which are basically just reports of how the novel's been used in other big reads and other places, which I think is super interesting. But then lower down on there is these two things, these reader resources, and then the teacher's guide is what I just handed out to you all. And like I said, I'll make sure to send this to you, Peter. But they're just simple lessons. I don't know how you. I'm not like a super big fan of canned lessons, but I like to steal stuff from them every now and then. There's some good things in there. There's some pretty good discussion activities, and there's some good handouts towards the end that are like really, really basic ideas, right? About like a quick summary of who the U.S. Marshals were, a quick summary of what the West was like after the Civil War, and a lot of these other kinds of things come up. But there's definitely a lot of good discussion questions for bringing it in. It breaks it up across, I think, 12 lessons. No, just 10. And they're okay, but I think they serve as a good starting point. They certainly get you thinking about a lot of these themes of the novel and get students kind of engaging in those a little bit. But I definitely think that they have to be sort of retailored, and I think most of them would apply to the films just as well as they would to the novel. The other thing that's on here is this reader resources, which is also like an interesting little like 10-page document of just other things about it. It's got character summaries for all the different characters, again, the author's bio. But probably, it's got like the historic context of like where the novel fits in, kind of gives you like a quick rundown. But one of the things that I think is really, really interesting is towards the end, it does offer a bunch of additional resources, including other novels and other books set during the West, and then other books that are similar, some of them from the same time period. like Louis L'Amour and things like that, and then others from other times as well. It kind of like gives this breadth of what the Western looks like across different time periods, which I think is really, really interesting. And a lot of these have film versions as well.
So, writing exercise. Have students write 5 separate sentences, each of which enlivens the description of a common physical activity, walking, eating, etc., by using a fresh comparison involving an animal.
There you go, Adrian. You got your creative writing prompts right there. Here we go.
Oh, no.
Done for you. The other thing that I started, and I will email this and share this. I started just like an open OneDrive doc of just other resources that I think might be useful or interesting that I'm thinking about using in mine. The first is just a link to the NEA website. I found this review of the original film from 1969 in American Magazine, which is pretty interesting, and then a review from the New York Times in 2010. This I just got because I'm an English teacher nerd. It's an article from 1970 in the English Journal about the novel's use for middle school students, which is probably not that useful for us as educators, but I don't know, I think it's interesting because it's like, this is what people thought about teaching this book in 1970. And then the last one that I remembered is, so earlier this year, I don't know if you guys saw this, there was, John Wayne gave an interview with Playboy in 1971, and people had sort of forgotten about it, and it sort of like resurfaced in social media, and he says a lot of like really, really problematic things in the interview, like a lot of homophobic things, a lot of racist things in the interview, and it sort of like was sort of back in like the social media consciousness. But what was interesting in this article is sort of like a recap of it from the Washington Post, was it brought up this discussion of like how we remember our pop culture icons. Like, do we sort of like, do we say, okay, yes, that was a different time, this was a different person, this is, you know, maybe they don't align with our values, but we can still sort of like remember them in a positive way? Or is this like, no, this person is now, you know, canceled because they said these really terrible things. That should be a part of the discussion as well. Yeah.
Well, so it's really, really interesting that you bring this up because I guess earlier in the month, Warner Brothers came out and kind of apologized for all of the bad racist Looney Tunes, but said that they would still, like, you know, you can still watch them and they're going to make them available and put them on TV and whatever, but they apologized, right? And it was kind of a big thing. It was like, why did they really need to apologize? And then, yay, that was really good of them. And then when Disney Plus dropped, Disney Plus also did like, hey, we're sorry that Dumbo is racist, but it's Dumbo and he's a cute elephant. And there was some criticism with Disney where I'm like, whoa, you should have really like owned up your racism on some of these things like Song of the South, Dumbo, you know, like the list goes on, because you can watch all of those things on Disney Plus now.
Right. Yeah. It creates this really interesting. Yeah, we're definitely gonna talk about it in my class. I'm excited about it.
It's very cool.
This article.
Very cool.
So what's cool about this article too is in the article there's a link to a safe for work transcript of the interview from Playboy, and it like gives like the whole Playboy interview without like all of the tutorials, and so it's something that you could easily bring into the classroom. But it's an interesting interview. I mean, I think historically Playboy's been pretty famous for its interviews, and they're usually like very in depth and very detailed. And it is a really, really interesting look at this person who was very famous, sort of giving his viewpoint on the state of America in 1971. Very interesting ideas about what America should be. And so these are things that I started to gather. What I would really, really love is, and I'm going to share this with all of you, and it's going to be editable, is if you come across other things, or if you want to put things, is please add to it, because then there are other things that we as a group can collectively kind of come back and use as well. And so please feel free to like grab stuff. If you find other stuff, just drop it in, put a link, or if it's not available online, if it's just like a book, you can just put the book title in there and we can look it up or order it on ILL. And if we get those early enough, the library might even just purchase them for us here so that they're on hand. But yeah, so I started this to kind of put this together. And one of the things that I hope would come, and this is sort of where I want us to shift a little bit, is just sort of having this conversation about how we see using this book in our class, our classes, how it might be used. And that way we can kind of start planning out what that looks like. I started drawing up my schedule for that semester, and starting to think about what these things look like. Let's see where. Yeah, and so what I wanted, this, and this. There we go. Okay, what I thought we could just take a few moments to see if any, what maybe even if you already have an idea of how you might, or how you might hypothetically use the book, Lauren, and just sort of like, and I'm kind of, I thought Susan was going to be here, and she used the book this semester, and so I was really looking forward to hearing what she had to say about how
She
students.
teaches technical writing from 5 to 6.
Oh, maybe she's not going to be here till 6 then.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll make sure that whatever she talks about doing, we'll add to those teacher resources, because I am excited. I really want to know what our students thought of it, and how it went over and what they, I don't know, it's always really interesting.
Yeah, she teaches till 6.
Okay, so yeah, so hopefully she'll be here later on and we'll get her perspective as well. But yeah, if you have any ideas for what you're thinking about, jot them down, and then I would love to hear them, maybe share them out a little bit.
And if anyone has ideas how to teach an overtly straight novel in a queer literature class, I would appreciate it. I don't know how I could justify teaching this in queer literature.
Yeah, it would definitely be tough. It would definitely be tough. I think it just, I don't know, I think
I could have students go see the 2 movies and compare the 2 Maddies.
that would be
Certainly in terms of gender identity, but I don't think that having them read the book is productive.
And I mean, and I think it's entirely possible that for some of this, that not everybody is using the book, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that Peter plans on teaching the whole novel. I think just discussing the film, and that'll be great too.
Well, I'm thinking about having them read the novel as well. See, the course I'm scheduled to teach is history, Southwestern history through film, and what I'm thinking about in terms of the novel is to sort of fit it in with, and again, the idea is to look at films dealing with the region, mostly sort of theatrical films, but with a historical basis, either set in a historical setting or depicting historical events. And there's, of course, a lot you can do with the theme in terms of exploring the nature of society, especially in the West of the 19th century. So what I'm thinking of is, showing the film, both versions, and saying, okay, we see the 1969 version, and this is how it seems to deal with various themes. Fast forward to the 2010 version, and again, it's depicting the same period, but in a very different way. And what does that tell us about the relationship between thinking about history and the time and place in which history is depicted? And again, this is a theme that sort of runs throughout, although there are those sort of iconoclastic films. I mean, if we look at The Searchers, for example, another John Wayne opus from the 1950s, again, that's a movie that in some ways goes against some of the dominant themes for Westerns, and depicts John Wayne as a character in some respects not exactly admirable, So, but those are sort of the kinds of themes, and connecting it with some of the historiography, Patricia Limerick and the so-called New Western History, in which she challenges some of the prevailing ideas about the West, that go all the way back to Frederick Jackson Turner and his thesis about the role of the frontier in American society. And, Limerick talks about how frontier society was not this freewheeling egalitarian place, that it was very hierarchical on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, and also on the basis of class. And sort of looking at, and both versions of the film sort of play up in that. Maddie's attitude toward someone like a Tom Chaney, who she characterizes as white trash, essentially. So
That sounds,
there are a lot of themes there, but but that's sort of what I have in mind. And in that context, I usually assign at least a couple of books in a history through film class that either give them a basis to look at the differences between, a written treatment of something and how it's dealt with in terms of a movie, and also the sort of complex relationship between how something is written and how it's depicted on film. So those are the kinds of themes that I'm kind of thinking about.
that sounds awesome. I want to take that class.
And I want to say, Peter, too, and another thing that comes to mind for me is the series of books by Laura Ingalls Wilder, the Little House on the Prairie series. I mean, I know they're kind of juvenile, but in a way, True Grit is juvenile. I mean, I read it in 7th grade. And how prevalent in the books the ideas of westward expansion and Native Americans, like, Pa Ingalls is always talking about the Injuns, right? And he's got to have his rifle there. And in the TV show, then that was very much played down.
Right.
And it was, when you watch the TV show with, what's his name?
Michael London.
Michael Landon.
Landon.
Michael Landon, thank you. And when you watch the TV show, it's more about the settler lifestyle, but much less about the implications of westward expansion on Native populations. So I don't know, that just comes to mind as something that might be a good point of comparison, because it's the same story from even more of a picture of naivete.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well,
in a lot of ways.
And I think it's interesting too to even look at the book, like having been being published in 1969, even looking at the book or 68 as like revisionist history, because I think I don't know how believable Maddie is as a character, that she would just sort of get away with like one of the early scenes is like her strong arming a lawyer essentially, and I don't know that anybody would actually listen to, for the same reasons you were saying, Peter, would listen to a 14-year-old girl. What lawyer in the Old West would just be like, oh, actually, you're right. I should, pay you for these ponies that I already sold that I legally have no right or obligation to. And I think that even that sort of is an interesting look at how Fortis is revising the West in the 1960s, and then even what we're doing with it now.
Well, although, I mean, again, one of the things that you sort of understand about the 19th century is that childhood was seen very differently.
That's true.
And that someone who is 14 might be considered adult in the sense of being able to assume. I mean, obviously there's the legal issue of, is someone of the age of majority, but women at 14 were being married. Well, hell, in some parts of the country, they're still being married at 14. But back then, I mean, again, those kinds of things, their adolescence wasn't wasn't the sort of distinct period that it is for us. And again, the line between being a juvenile and being an adult was blurred, and again, individuals became adult in a sense by doing adult things.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's Well, one of the ways that I'm thinking about incorporating, and also I'm thinking of, I do a lot of pop culture studies too, and I'm thinking of presenting the text and the films as examples of pop culture, and sort of looking at the Western and its place in pop culture. Having students take some of that analysis that we point at the novel, we point at the films, and then finding their own examples of Westerns. So like Little House on the Prairie, but I'm thinking also more like, even recent, more, well, actually there haven't been that many, but well, the Coen
It's not
brothers.
really, I think Little House on the Prairie, I wouldn't call it a Western per se.
Well, and even just that question of like, what
Like,
categorizes
what
a
makes it a
Western,
Western
right?
versus a memoir,
Right,
really.
exactly. And so, and really just having and sort of exploring that question and looking at looking at films, looking at, like I said, the Coen Brothers. I mean, that's like basically all they've been making lately, right? It was this, and then it was Buster Scruggs, right? That's a Western.
Yeah.
And then No Country for Old Men. Did they make something in between No Country
Yeah,
for
they
Old
did
Men?
that Chris Pine film. Low Down. Oh, no.
Hell or High Water?
Hell and High Water.
No, that was not them.
Yes, it was.
I think that was the director of Sicario.
Oh.
Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, but having a look at different examples, and then I don't know, when I remember like you know, just having I totally just lost my phone.
Sorry.
That's okay, it's not your phone. I don't remember what I was gonna say. But anyway, but like sort of bringing in those other books or those other films and having students sort of look at how where the Western sort of is situated in our society. Even the novel itself, I think the 1960s was a period of Westerns where we were looking back, and I'm really interested in those like 30-year and 50-year pop culture cycles. So we kind of rotate through those, and of course the Coen film is part of it's like that 50-year cycle where we're bringing it back. And it wasn't the only Western that was remade in that same time period, right? There was another Magnificent Seven. And, what's the other one? There was another one. Say it again.
Hostile.
Maybe that was
the one that they filmed around here. I can't remember the time.
Yes, yeah. And then I remember the other one, the 310 to Yuma, that was filmed like just like a year or two before, I think. True Grit was just
the Glenn Ford one, and then the one with Russell Crowe and Christian Bale. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so like they're sort of like part of these cycles, and I'm really interested in having students explore that, and again exploring taking the analysis that we point at the book and applying it to other texts that they're maybe more familiar with. Are students still really excited about like the Young Guns movies? I remember when I taught here before, that was like the one Western reference I could make and all my students would know, because they're like, yeah, Lou Diamond Phillips. No, is that phased out? No. But anyway, that was one of the ones that I was thinking of. No, you don't guys.
So
Young Guns?
I don't even know what that is.
Young Guns.
Young Guns one and
I'm like pop culture illiterate.
But it's about Billy the Kid. It's like
right. It's a retelling of the Lincoln County War, and again, that's one of the movies I'm considering using the Young Guns, maybe even both of them, and sort of comparing them to like John Wayne in Chisholm, the 1960s depiction of the County War, so.
There's lots of
I
good
think the
stuff.
most recent Western I've probably watched is Blazing Saddles.
I think that's a great one as well. I think because that also does like a couple of things, right? Where it's also looking at Hollywood in that time period as well, and that's really interesting.
It's a parody of
Yeah. Other thoughts, Veronica? You have any ideas? If you were hypothetically teaching the students, middle schoolers. It's okay. We can go back to you.
Well, when I was young and introduced to Westerns, of course we watched a lot of John Wayne movies. We watched a lot of John Hurst. He did maybe not. Anyways, but when we thought of Westerns growing up, we also thought of the sort of religious side of Westerns, the missionary, going across. There was a lot of that conversation, how missionaries and like people on wagon trains would go and ride the West and try to save the natives,
right?
And I would think that would be a really interesting conversation. And there's some movies out there that actually, and some books. I have Louis L'Amour actually has some conversations like that in some of his books. But that would be, I would maybe dive into that.
That would be really interesting too.
But then compare and contrast the sort of religious undertones that are here in this state, like Catholicism and why that's still
very loaded.
Loaded.
AJ, any thoughts? What you guys were going to do with your juniors?
After thinking about it, thinking back to the pages I read, I think this would actually work pretty well with my freshmen as well.
Oh, cool.
So I'm considering doing it with both classes. I think for my freshmen, I'd like to focus on the genre and the conventions of the genre, because I myself am not familiar necessarily with with Westerns and the convention. So I think talking about that, talking about the narrator and talking about how maybe she perceives herself versus how others perceive her. So talking about that, of course, incorporating writing the book narrative with your help, because I've decided that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, of course.
And so
Me too.
some analytical writing as well. With juniors, I think I would want to focus again on the narrator, because I always do as I lay down Faulkner at the end of the year. So I think this would be a good introduction to how a first-person narrator functions. So in the book, all of that. And with the juniors, I think taking it a step further and maybe looking at gender in a way. Sort of as you were talking about with this movement in the 60s and even the late 50s, going back to like the Westerns, how it was the genre of the time, maybe looking at how that notion of masculinity, of manhood, of toughness runs counter to what was happening nationally with the domestic sphere of the suburban life, right? This sort of generation that they didn't fight in the war.
Gloria Steinem and the feminist movement.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the early 70s. That's the founding of Ms. Magazine. You know, it does in a way. You know, you can say those two are diametrically opposed, or you can say that they sync up in the representation of women.
Yeah, so I think gender, genre, narrative voice, and then I like some of these themes too, just how kind of subjective they are. Where is the line between revenge and justice? Yeah, is there a such thing as justice? Like, you know, what is justice? Yeah. So I think that's the way I would kind of do that. But I'm excited because now I have another book, my freshman, that I think would work well. And if Katie and I both decide to do that, I think between the two of us freshmen, we have maybe 110. So that would.
What grade is freshman? Ninth. Okay.
Ninth grade.
Yeah, sorry, Canadian education is
Oh,
there's no
okay.
middle school, so.
It's all right.
But yeah, that's awesome.
There's no.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, just even the Western as like a genre analysis, I think is like, it's a super fascinating thing, because it's almost not something we even read anymore, like popularly. Like there was a time when, like Louis L'Amour, when Westerns were a popular genre. I know my dad grew up reading lots
Zane
of
Grey novels, are those a thing? I remember my mom always buying those for her father, and I think they were Westerns.
My dad was
They were? Okay. I'm like, I don't know, I never.
Zane Grey, Max Brand.
Yeah.
You have those sort of the mid 20th century stuff. You know, Max Brand, who, you know, he also wrote sort of Renaissance novels. It's guys, and as well as all the Dr. Kildare novels. That same guy wrote them all. That is Friedrich Faust. Anyway, but you have all those Max Brand novels. You have people like J.T. Edson. Zane Grey is sort of the classic. Owen Wister, you know, the Virginian. And then, you know, starting in the 40s and 50s, all the way up through the 70s, it's Louis L'Amour. And then you get those sort of really schlocky kind of long arm, you know, that's half Western, half sort of pornography. And
I know. I just Googled Zane Grey, and like it came up with Louis L'Amour and Owen Wilst, and then underneath it said also Danielle Steele.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course, yes. But no, I think like it's an interesting idea of why of just, and I think they're straightforward answers about why the Western has sort of like left our popular consciousness. So I think there have even been a few films recently that have not done really great. There was an Ethan Hawke one recently, and I don't even know if that came out. It sort of just disappeared. And I don't know if it's just not where we are, or maybe we're not where we are like culturally, where that's something that we're valuing anymore, or even just and I also think it's interesting to think about how the Western gets like transmuted into other genres as well. I don't know. I think of like the John Carter of Mars books as kind of like Westerns, even though they take place on Mars, because all he did was take like indigenous peoples and turn them into indigenous Martians, and like the Confederacy and turn them into these people, and so it's
like Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so like there's a lot of those kinds of things as well, or even just the way that a lot of Westerns pulled from Japanese films, and like samurai films being like the predecessor of a lot of Westerns.
Well, yeah,
the
Kurosawa's Seven Samurai remade is the Magnificent Seven, and then, one of the interesting things that I've noticed in the last 5 years is that you're starting to see Westerns that are actually set in like Germany and places like that.
Yes. Well, I'm sorry.
I watched a couple of these things. It's just, someone whose parents are murdered, flees the United States and comes back to Germany and then, uses a Winchester to mow down the people who murdered his parents. It's,
Well, and then there's the, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that Australian film.
The proposition.
The Proposition.
Yeah, Australian
Or-
Westerns as
Well,
being.
1970, I was looking up the year. So I watched a lot of Russian cinema, probably more Russian cinema than American cinema. And White Son of the Desert, Beauty Soul, is a Russian Western. And so that is sort of an international phenomenon of Russian filmmakers borrowing, and it's very much a parody.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think in some ways, seeing Westerns outside of the United States Westerns gives another context to the idea of Westerns. Like, we weren't the only state or country that needed to be settled. You know,
Yeah.
we aren't the only country that had a Western front either, and that there were other countries that were dealing with same sort of issues across the board, and that makes it kind of it extends the dialogue further.
No, I think that there's a lot of those like even just like Sergio Leone made like so many Westerns, and he was Italian, and they were like all filmed in Spain, but like Clint Eastwood was in all of them, and so like this like they're really interesting kind of way of thinking about those Westerns taking place outside of America. But all of those films, please add them to the list when I send it to you all. Other ideas, other thoughts, other places to go. I have lots of ideas now, which is the point of this.
well, one of the things that sort of intrigues me is, and again, it sort of connects True Grit with the Young Guns movies and all those earlier iterations of like the Lincoln County War and the gunfight at the OK Corral. One of the things that we don't tend to think about so much when we watch a Western is the sort of institutional basis of it. So why was the West wild? And one of the reasons is that as long as places like New Mexico and Arizona territories were territories, they lack the institutions that a state would have. And because the populations are small, because the governments are weak, that creates opportunities for the unscrupulous. And so, there's a wonderful history of the Lincoln County War written by a guy named Utley, who was a historian with the Park Service. It's called High Noon in Lincoln. And he basically says that the Lincoln County War that's been so romanticized was essentially no more romantic than a sort of war over turf between rival drug gangs. And, the way in which violence is a consequence of weak institutions and corrupt politics. The fact that in Lincoln County specifically, you have a governor and a sheriff who are essentially in the pocket of one side of a faction. And so, so the other side tries to get its own sort of quasi-official status. And so you end up with people claiming to be law officers killing one another for economic control. And that's more or less what happens in the in Tombstone, in the the clash between the Earps and their friends and the Clanton McLaury people. And so the thing about, and what connects that to True Grit for me is the fact that when Tom Chaney kills Maddie's father, he flees from Arkansas, which is a state, into the territory, into the Indian territory, where there's not that much in the way of law. And so the only recourse she has is to go to the U.S. Marshal. And again, as we've noted, Rooster Cogburn, as depicted in the novel, as depicted in the movies, is pretty, he's not the ideal, dispassionate, objective dispenser of justice.
Yeah.
So that's another sort of theme that I sort of like to play with in both the idea that these things aren't, the gunfights and, these kinds of conflicts, there's nothing romantic about them. And for all of the, the scripted Hollywood thing about people going out in the middle of the street and, draw and having it, again, in reality, people are shooting each other in the back. There's nothing romantic about it. And so trying to dispel those myths, or at least to say, okay, well, why is this such a powerful and enduring idea? And why, again, if you go back and you think of, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, there's that scene at the end where they say, when it's a question between the truth and the legend, you print the legend, or something. I'm paraphrasing very badly there, but you get the idea.
Well, yeah, and I think for me too, like that's where I'm like really interested from like a pop culture stand, and like the way we have these like 50-year cycles, and there's like sometimes we do these cycles and they are sort of like they embody like a restorative nostalgia where it's like, oh, let's focus on all what was amazing about the West. And I think that's very much the John Wayne True Grit is like, this is what the West was like, and it is romanticized. And then you have more like a reflective nostalgia where it's like, okay, let's look back on what it was with a little bit more of a critical eye. And I think in some ways, the Coen brothers film is like that, but it's also still very much like, we're also still like, Rooster Cogburn is still like the man's man that we're supposed to be rooting for.
It's the first thing we see in the trailer.
Right,
You're
exactly.
supposed to connect with him. You're supposed to like follow his part of the story,
Right.
even though it is the woman's story.
Yeah.
Even though she narrates it better in the Coen brothers experience than in the John Wayne one, but you still like, he has the opening line.
Yeah.
He is what you see. You see him, he's more central in all of the frames as opposed to she's always downwind of him or
Right.
looking up to him.
Right.
They're never on the same platform.
Yeah. Oh, where's Martine?
I know.
We need a film analysis in here as well. More film. I had another thought too, and I lost it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just like to break thought patterns.
It's all good.
Yeah.
It's really easy right at this point in the semester.
It's what I do.
Especially when all of our files are stored in 5 different places now.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
I know you're hunting for that one jump drive that you think has your old notes.
grief.
Is that the truth?
Fantastic. So any of these things? Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So the other thing that I think we have is our awesome archivists at Donnelly Library, and all of the newspaper clippings that they have and photographs from this time period and even earlier, I think is going to be really, really great as well, to kind of maybe dispel some of that romanticism of the West. And, and they've, I think that we've got photographs of the hangings and the lynchings that took place in Vegas, and really kind of using those and thinking about how those disrupt this romantic Western, because even the novel in a certain sense is romanticizing the West. I don't think anybody would.
Wasn't the first public hanging was a woman, and it was here at the plaza?
You mean the first one in Vegas?
No, in the state.
Oh, I don't know if it was in the state.
I don't know.
I
Peter, do you know?
No, it's not something I ever looked at.
Yeah, I think it's something to look into for sure.
Isn't that what the plaque on that dead tree in the plaza says, though? I thought.
No, that's when Kearney came and
Oh,
fired the cannons and was like, "We own you now."
Yeah. Oh, that's
Slightly
what that one
different.
is. I
Not
have-
very. I mean, but yeah.
No, that's probably what he did.
Yeah.
Big memory of that.
So I have a question for you all.
Yeah.
Since she wasn't planning on teaching this in her AP language class. So is there any way that you think she'd be able to justify focusing on language? Because it's pretty simple writing stuff. So are there any ideas that you guys have about, she was wanting to do it just because that's one less plan to make,
I mean,
focusing on language?
I mean, there's certainly dialect to get into as well, and the way that the characters speak and talk, and there are some pretty good ones in there. Like I said, that courtroom scene is sort of transcribed. It's not super heavy dialect, but it's definitely getting there. But I think
This would probably be a good reading for them to do like on their own. maybe even over Christmas break.
Yeah, yeah, and there's that as well. I guess, and partly too, I'm not as familiar with the AP language curricula either to know what do they normally focus on?
Primarily rhetoric, but you can include fiction if you're focusing on figurative language and
Well,
word
it has
choice, sentence structure, all
a
that.
couple things you could use. One are there are political interludes within the novel, as Ben was talking about, and so I tell my students in writing memoir that no memoir is unpolitical. Can we also say that no novel is unpolitical?
Absolutely.
And so how is this in some ways a platform for Portis through his protagonist to express political opinions?
Yeah.
And where does that language emerge? At what kinds of moments does it emerge? That becomes very important in terms of not only characterization, but also politicizing the novel.
Yeah.
The other thing to consider is that it's a book technically written far in the future of when the events of the novel occur.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, and it's
And so it has what we
Yeah.
call a cornice, which is customarily a feature of a novella. But the cornice is when you have a character sort of speak from the future and say, now I'm going to tell you the story of what happened to me back when. For example, Ivan Turgenev's First Love, where he's sitting in a room with a group of people and they say, tell us about your first love. And then he launches into that story, and that story comprises the bulk of the piece. The same here with Maddie from the future telling us the story of Maddie in the past, but we know that the question here is time period, right? And setting. We know that the actual setting of the book is the present, if you will, but the whole book is a recollection.
Yeah.
So that rhetorically becomes very important as a storytelling device.
Maybe even something similar in Bless Me Ultimo, right? Because he says, I'm going to tell you what happened to me when I was 7 years old.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think, and there's that aspect as well, like what Lauren was saying too, where no text is unpolitical as well. Like I said before, like she does go on like several political diatribes. So why does Portis have this 14-year-old girl character who's not 14 but an adult now?
Yeah.
Give us so much background about her political beliefs.
And why does she care?
Yeah, exactly. Why is that an important feature of the story? And that becomes part of the message that the book is maybe not trying to deliver, but is delivering
It's
regardless.
strong. Yeah.
Right. And so where does this fit in to those political stand? Like, is that meant to make her
Does she become a stronger female
Yes,
character for
because-
having a political investment?
yes, or for having these political investments, right, as well? Like, and those become ways of digging into that too.
What do you think that the author, I mean, I haven't read the book, but do you think that the reason why she is, in order for an older man to take her seriously, she had to be sort of gruff? And that was the way, it was like only strong or anti-feminine women, they talk politics, because that's not what you do in the household. The women don't talk politics. The men go into their room, they smoke their pipe, they drink their whiskey, they talk politics. When the women go in the kitchen, sew their things, cook the meal,
Right.
talk about babies.
I mean, it could be, and maybe he's trying to position her as a role model character too, in that sense, right? Because if he's writing this, and this is geared at that age reader as well, I think this is like a young adult novel for young adult novels.
Yeah, but I feel like at the time that the book was written, this was just, it was more of a ploy for him as a character. I don't think he had any grand delusions about like creating a model for her.
But does it matter whether he wanted to?
Well, no, it probably doesn't. It probably doesn't. But I just wouldn't give him that
Does a
credit.
thorough intent count?
Yeah, I just don't want to give this guy that credit.
That's fair.
And does that give her credibility? Is that maybe her efforts kind of legitimize her, her views?
Yeah.
Saying like, hey, I'm learning.
So I think that's the rhetorical. So if you wanted to teach the the book from a rhetorical perspective, it certainly has all of those things working for it.
But cool. No, I think Veronica's right. I think there's a lot that, yeah, there's a lot to play with. What he intended, what the outcome was, and maybe, and I jokingly put it on there, but now I'm wondering too if that article from the English Journal from 1970 talking about working with middle school kids, that probably has a lot of like what they thought middle schoolers in the 1970s would get out of the novel. So I'm definitely going to return to that, see what it says. That's super cool.
Yeah, because it was published in 1968.
Yeah.
I mean, don't.
Well, I think like Lauren said, like that's right at the cusp of.
That is also true. You said that.
And she also talks like she as an adult, she writes as well, and she writes like historical
I
articles.
want to find out now, when did Steinem found Ms. Magazine?
71. Is that too late?
I don't know, but I'm looking it up. You're correct,
Because
December
that's-
1971.
Because
Good work.
Because Wonder Woman was on the cover, that's why I know.
Yeah.
It all goes back to comics for me. But awesome. Well, any other thoughts? I don't want to belabor this with past having lots of good ideas, or any other questions.
Is there a particular edition? Because I mean, the copy I have, it's somewhere in my basement, and I got it in like 1972. So
I don't think that. I think that currently the only edition in print is the one that I included a picture of, and it's the one that we all have, that we have here. But I don't think it really matters. Like the page numbers will be different, but I don't think that there are any significant addition changes.
Yeah.
The new one has an afterword by Donna Tartt, which is pretty cool. But I'm telling my students that they can just get whatever version they happen to get.
Uh-huh.
I'm sure they can find some older ones online for like $3.
I
Even
bet
this
their
is not.
grandpas have one.
Well, even this one says it's 15. I feel like I even saw it online for 7.
I got
New.
7 online.
Yeah, like I don't think it's that expensive, or that it makes that huge of a difference unless you want them all using the same edition. But I don't think we as a thing are bound by an edition. Any other thoughts? Any other ideas, questions, quibbles, controversies? Well, fantastic. I definitely have all of your email addresses. I'll make sure to send you that teacher resources document. Feel free to add to it, take from it, is all that good stuff. And that can just be a repository for other ideas or questions as well. I'm sure if Katie wants to throw some questions out there or some of her ideas, that's fantastic. I would love to see that as well. And I will be absolutely stealing from all of you. So feel free to steal from me as well. I'll probably start putting some of my lesson plans in there as well at some point. We'll start putting them together, which I've started doing right. I have enough to do, I guess. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Peter. I know you have to teach soon. Appreciate you joining us. I appreciate all your great ideas. I think I might just try to like sneak into your class when you're discussing the novel
Okay.
at some point and hear what you all are talking about. But yeah, thank you all.
All right. Have a good evening.
As
You
well.
too. You can just pause it then.
It's made me miss classes being a student.
Uh,
It's different when you're talking to 16-year-olds.